All right, so we have a web page, right? And now the goal is to have it published. So last time when we left off, we created our first website, right? It's a small site containing just one page. So here it is, right? Our first website. We have an index .html, and we have an image of a quokka there, and that results in a page like this. So now the idea is that in order for us to really put it on the web, we need to make sure that it's actually being loaded from the server, because right now it's being loaded from my computer from the users, Maxim, desktop, whatever folders, right? So this is the folder path on my computer. It's the same path that would take you to this exact location, right? So here it is, users, Maxim, desktop, and so on. So there are several ways of doing this, definitely more than one, and we are going to be following just one pathway towards it. So what we are going to be doing, we're going to be using GitHub, and specifically GitHub Pages service in order to publish our website. But that kind of opens up a larger conversation around version control and Git and all those terms, crazy terms flying around in space. So we need to address all of this. So let's start by looking at GitHub, Git version control, and kind of like how this whole thing works. And then in the end, we'll, through the sort of like roundabout way, we'll come out to actually publishing our webpage, right? And collecting a whole bunch of sort of benefits along the way as we're getting there. All right, so let's start with GitHub. So when you load github.com, it probably is not going to look like this because I'm already logged into my account. But if you're familiar with it, and if you already have a web account on GitHub, it might look something like this for you as well. But otherwise, right, if I were to just open private window, go to github.com, right, it would be something like this. All the people who are using it and all this stuff, which doesn't really tell you, like this image of code and Copilot and 22% agrees, and what the hell does all that mean? So fundamentally, let's just kind of unravel all of this and look at like what Git is, what GitHub is, and how we can use all of this technology to our advantage. So let's start with Git. Git is a version control system. This version control system was invented by Linus Torvalds, the creator of Linux operating system, and it helped him sort of like create this massive collaborative environment where tons of people were able to kind of work with him on this one big project, right? So the idea of the version control system might be already somewhat familiar to you if you ever looked at something like Time Machine on a Mac, like the backup system, or similar systems on Windows, right? So it tracks the changes to files on your computer, and it kind of stores those changes every so often, right? Time Machine will do it, let's say, once a day or once a week, however you want to configure it. Or with other version control systems, you maybe have more control over how you store those incremental changes. But fundamentally, the idea is that you track small changes and you kind of create these points, right, to which then you can go back if the changes maybe are undesirable, right? So let's, usually visually it's represented something like this, right? So if I have a website, right, again, we're looking at a website, and so let's say I have a website. I started right here. That was me making my homepage, right? Then I created version number, so this is version number 0, and then I created version number 1. Right, so in version number 1, I added like a navigation bar, and I made some other modifications and whatever not, right? And then I moved on to version number 2, right? And in version number 2, I added another page, like an about page. And then I created a version number 3, and I removed some of the content from the about page and added some more content to the about, and so on and so forth. And so This is basically, each one of those is a version, right? And you can store those versions, and then let's say in version number 4, I removed one of the images on the front page, and then somebody else saw it and said that it was a horrible idea. And so, but the file is already deleted and gone. And so that's a problem, right? I would have to go and recreate that file, or I can just roll back to version 3 where that image, where that file was still intact, and sort of like start moving in a different direction, right? So that would be a different version. So this is 5 and 6 and so on. I'm going to keep making changes and keep tracking those changes, right? Different systems do it differently. For different files, it's done differently. But since when it comes to programming languages and coding and that kind of endeavors, we usually deal with text files. Git is optimized to do it on a line-by-line basis. So every time you make a change to one line of code, Git will register it as a modification. Right? You add something, you delete something, you change one character to another character. All of that can be tracked as a change in your code base, right? So that's version control. That's all fantastic, right? And so Git is a system that allows you to do this, and GitHub is a service that provides this system, right? So you can, they facilitate the implementation of Git version control for you, right? For your own purposes. And it's a widely popular platform. Pretty much everybody's on it. Everybody, at least, who's dealing with code and programming, and even some people who don't, right? So I know, for example, that some law firms use GitHub in order to track changes in legal documents and user agreements and so on and so forth, and contracts. All right. So GitHub would allow you to then, instead of having to kind of like go through a lengthy process of setup and configuration, just take it out of the box and use it. So each one of those code bases, right, each one of those branches or trees, something like this, right, is called a repository. So this is a repository of code, and you can think about it as basically a bunch of code that is thematically related, all the stuff that's related somehow. So for example, in our case, it's a website, right? So even here, so this is our website. Everything that's in that folder is related to that website, and so it's all going to be contained in one repository, right? So how you define what a repository is very much open-ended. But one thing that one sort of parallel that I can offer is just a folder, right? A repository is a folder, and that folder can be really big and can have a lot of stuff, right? So for example, like my user folder will have downloads and documents and music and pictures and all those other subfolders, right? So like it's a lot of stuff. Or it can be very small, right? It can be just a couple of files. But one way or another, it's somehow thematically related content that is all then being tracked together through these versions, right? So how do you want to track those things together? So we are going to create our own repository, and I recommend that you kind of keep a bunch of related content all together. You don't have to create, for example, a new repository for the same content, right? Like, so you made, like, let's say 1 week you made a website, and then next week you started adding some like little bits and pieces to it. You don't need to create another repository that second week. You can keep going and you just keep building up on top of it. But if you are creating a totally different project, then you can create a new repository, right? Another way to think about this is maybe all of the contents, like if you're in college or in university, right, or grad school, you can have the entire work for a semester contained in one repository, or you can have one project. Like if you have 3 projects in a semester, each project can be its own repository, right? Many ways to deal with grouping and tracking all those changes in all those files. So what we will do, we will kind of create a repository and make it fairly ambiguous, but we'll just have it related to everything with this website that we're building, right? Okay, So let's do that. So once you create an account, which I'm sure you'll be able to create an account on a web service, or you can use an existing account if you already have one on GitHub, then you'll be able to see something like this, right? So I have a bunch of repositories already, and then you'll be able to create a new one and add one of those, and add a repository to a list of your repositories if you have some already, or just make a new one if you don't, right? So let's add new repository. We'll just and we'll call it first website, right? So description, we can explain what that is. The important part of GitHub is that it also has a significant social component, so people can see your repositories and show you their repositories, and there's kind of like a social network, kind of like a combination of Instagram and LinkedIn, but for people who code. So it's a good idea to describe, right, what it is that people are going to be looking at when they look at your repository. So this is a collection of files related to a website, right? Make it public, make it private. It's not a bad idea to make it public, add it to your resume, for example, or portfolio, and then be able to tell people that, you know, you have some stuff hosted on GitHub. Do you want to add a README file with further explanations? Sure, let's add a README file. Why not? Do you want to add a git ignore? So git ignore is a file that will allow you to disregard some of the files in your repository, right? So for example, operating systems often create some files that we absolutely don't need to track, and they just kind of junk that will be created for every folder on your computer, but for our code base, they're absolutely useless, and we can start ignoring them. And there are some templates depending on maybe like the programming language you're using. So if you look at it like, oh, if you're using C++, we can make a git ignore template for you. Or if you're using, I don't know, Lisp or Erlang or whatever, right? For our first website, I'd say let's not bother with this. Let's just create it as it is, and then license. Since this code is going to be available to the public, do you want to attach a license to it to describe what people can and cannot do? And again, you can read more about any and all of those in here on those links. But I tend to, for my creative work, I tend to just add a Creative Commons 0 license to it, and then lastly, there's a little sentence that says, this will set main as your default branch, right? So you can have several versions of the same code base simultaneously. For example, if different people are working on different features, one person is updating the nav bar, another person is updating a footer on your website, and they have different branches, and they can sort of like do their work. One person does their work on one branch, and another person does their work on another branch, and then you can merge those branches together. And there's this whole complicated component to Git that allows you to sort of facilitate collaborative work. We're not going to deal with this. I'll add a link to the description of this video that kind of to a playlist that describes some of those features. Fantastic playlist. If you were interested in learning more about using Git and GitHub specifically, highly recommend you check it out. Right, but we are going to just stick to main branch as our pretty much only branch. But it's not a bad idea to just remember that this is what our branch is going to be called. So let's create the repository. In we go. Okay, so this is the repository as it exists right now, right? So we have two files in there. We have a license, and if you click on it, you can actually read the contents of this license. There's a lot of legalese. But not as much as you would expect, right? And then there's a README file, which just for now just contains the description that we added, but we can obviously expand on this. So now all of this exists on github.com on, again, somebody's computer in the cloud. And while we have access to it, it's not really on our computer, right? So now it's important to kind of think about how does the workflow get structured, right? And so how, for example, can my first website, all of these files that I've created, how can they be added to this repository so I can start tracking those changes, right? So the idea is, and let's switch over and I'm going to start drawing a little bit again. So the idea is that you are going to have, let's do maybe a different color. So you are going to have a server. Here it is. A big computer somewhere in the cloud. And that's as bulky a cloud as I can make. So this is our cloud. And our repository right now sits here. And it's called remote or origin, depending on the context, right? So this is what we see here on github.com, right, on their server. So this is their server. This is our repository on their server. And now we have our own computer. Let's assume that it's a laptop. It doesn't have to be a laptop. It can just as well be a desktop, but that doesn't matter, right? So we have our own little computer like this. And now we need to make sure that we have the same code base on this computer, right? So you can, if you go to their to the page, you can certainly download the zip file containing the files in your repository, or the other option is to clone, right? So there's fundamental difference between these options, to clone or to download. And the difference is that when you download something, it completely loses its connection to its place of origin, right, where it came from. Right, the file is now on your computer, right? Like, for example, in the previous video, we saw downloaded an image. Now the image exists on the computer, and it's no longer tied to its original location. Cloning means that the connection is going to be retained. So when I clone the repository to my computer, it's actually going to maintain the uplink to its origin. And so now we can continue moving the traffic, moving the changes, moving the files, adding and removing them back and forth, origin and remote. But we don't want to like add some files on the origin and pull them into the computer. Maybe there's a scenario where you want to do this, but in the vast majority of cases, you want to make all the changes here on your local machine and then push them up into the remote origin. One of the reasons for this is because the origin is sort of like a golden standard, right? Everything is working, it's public facing, people can access it and look at the files, and you don't want to be embarrassed of something breaking there. So you don't want to make changes to your golden standard code base, right? You want to do it on your local computer, try it out, make sure that nothing breaks, make sure that everything is a spick and span and exactly the way you want it to be, and then push it up to the origin in the cloud, right? And that way you can have it, let's say, on your laptop, and then at home you can have the same repository, right, on your desktop computer, right? And that's your desktop, let's say with a big monitor, something like that, right? And you can have the same exact repository cloned on that machine as well, right? And if you clone it, you'll be able to push and pull it, right? And so you can make some changes on your desktop, push them up into the cloud, then pull them from your computer, from your laptop computer, and make some other changes, push them up, and so, or you can have two different people work on the same code base that way, and so on and so forth, right? But fundamentally, the idea is that you are cloning the code to your computer rather than just downloading it, right? And so this process of pushing, pulling, and kind of like facilitating this connection back and forth between the remote and the local clone of the repository, in order to facilitate all this interaction, we need some kind of software, right? Some kind of a helper. And there are a couple of ways you can do this. You can do this with command line and terminal, and some people prefer this. I prefer this for various reasons, but I think if you're just starting out, it might be a little bit easier to kind of like wrap your head around this whole process by using a little application that will kind of like facilitate this back and forth from your local machines to the remote and so on and so forth. So to get an application like this, you would go to github.com/apps/desktop, right? So the application is called GitHub Desktop, right? And it will facilitate your connection from your local machine to the GitHub server, and it will allow you to kind of like move the contents of your repository to another computer, and then it will allow you to add the changes, make the changes, track your repository, and so on and so forth. So you would want to click on download now, select the appropriate version, right? So it will offer you to download it for Mac OS, but if you are on an Apple Silicon, like M1, M2, M3 Mac, like me, you might want to double check on that and download for Apple Silicon Mac, right? The difference is going to be for Silicon Mac, it's going to be ARM64, and for regular Mac, for Intel-based Mac, it's going to be x64 file. So let's get the correct version, at least for me. And almost doesn't matter where you store it. Sure, it wants to drop it into my first website folder. Why not? I don't care. But once this downloads, I'll be able to start it and sort of configure it, and it will facilitate my interaction with GitHub. Okay. All right. Here we go. Let's open it up, unzip it. And I'm fairly certain that you can just run it from any repository, but I'm going to be neat about the entire thing and drop it into the applications and delete my zip folder. And then in there, I'm going to go to G for GitHub Desktop. Just go with the name. There it is, missed it several times, and I'm going to launch it. All right, so it might ask you if you're sure that you want to open it because it was downloaded from the internet, and sure, yes, we want to open it. So here it is. Welcome to GitHub Desktop, and it's going to ask you, do you want to sign into your account? Obviously, because that way you'll be able to use it as a user of that account, and you'll be the owner of the repositories that you're cloning. So yes, okay, let's authorize it. Okay, so here it offers you to add a signature. So basically every time you make a new version, remember, like, make a new change, right? So there's going to be a number to this commit, but there's also going to be a signature, who made the change. That way you can track who did what kind of who did the kind of work that was done and who implemented the changes that were implemented. And you can blame certain people when things go wrong and so on and so forth, right? So here GitHub Desktop is offering you an option of how your signature will look like, right? So you select your email, your name, and then this is what it will look like, the signature, right? So with my name. So let's do that. Let's create it. Now let's get started. Do you wanna clone a repository or create a tutorial repository and so on and so forth? So I'm actually gonna close this because you might wanna do this several times, right? And I think this window only pops up once in the very beginning, right? But then you will go into the menu bar on your system, whether it's on a Mac or on a PC, and there's going to be a file option, right? Just like there always is. And in the file, you can create a new repository, you can add a local repository, or you can clone one. So I'm going to click on Clone Repository. And GitHub Desktop is about to I'm guessing pop up a window. Apparently not, but that's fine. So that's not even the best way of doing this. Really, the best way of doing this is to go to your repository on the on GitHub.com, right? And here, there's an option, Open with GitHub Desktop. So all you have to do is just click here, Open with GitHub Desktop, and it's going to open that link in the application. So here it is. It's opening the window that allows you to clone this repository, right? So you can select the existing one from github.com, the ones that you are looking for, or if you just, again, click out of this, and it's gonna pre-populate it for you with the path to the repository, right? So it's github.com/connectedcat/first website. That's what it is. And then the local path is really important because we talked about the fact that the clone maintains the connection with the origin, right? And so it maintains the connection not just by the name of the repository or by the files that are inside it, it maintains it by the local path. So this location on your computer is going to be that special location that will contain the repository link to the origin, to github.com. And if you decide, for example, to take that website, to take that folder that is going to be created and move it to some other location, that link is going to be broken, right? So we will not be able to, and let's change the color real quick, we'll not be able to do this anymore because it's only tracks the files in that specific location. So keep in mind where that location is, and if you need to move your clone to a different location, you're going to have to re-clone it again. That's the way to do it, right? So it's going to create, in the documents folder for me, it's going to create a GitHub folder and then put the first website in there. That's fine. That's what I want to do. So let's click on clone. All right. So here is the GitHub desktop window, and this is what's going to be, again, tracking your changes that you're making locally, and then you'll be able to update those changes and push them up for the origin, right? For the remote origin, and for those changes to show up in the in your GitHub repo server. All right, so let's see how that works. So you can open this. So first of all, let's look at this repository in Finder, right? So if you click Show in Finder or in Explorer, if you're on Windows, right, it's going to take you to this GitHub folder that it created, and here's your repository. And in that repository right now, you have a license and the README. Okay, as you can see here as well, right? You can also, from github.com, from GitHub Desktop, you can also open it in Visual Studio Code, right? So if we do this, yes, I trust the author. I'm the author. I don't mind. Yes, trust, please. Here we go. So again, this is the license, that document with a bunch of legalese, and here is the README. This is the first website title, and this is the collection of files related to a website, right? Just like we saw on github.com. Fantastic. So we, though, already have a website, right? It's right here. It's in this folder on our desktop, right? And we want to make sure that the index.html that we started editing and the image of a quokka are now become part of the repository. So we're going to take both these, both the file and the folder, right? The images folder with the quokka image and the index.html file, and I'm going to just move this right over here. You can totally do this. Do you want to copy images or add images as a folder if you want to the workplace? I'll just copy the folder, right? So now we have images folder with a quokka website, with a quokka image and our image.html or index.html web page. That's fantastic. And since this is actually a GitHub repository, now you can see that Visual Studio Code kind of tracks some of these changes and shows that it's been updated, right? Not deleted, not added, but updated. And now these two are in green color. So if we go to GitHub Desktop, now we see that in the changes for the current repository, which is our first website, we have two changed files. We added a file quokka1.webp in the images folder, and then we added a file index.html. Okay, so in order for us to create this next step in the tree, right, next point in our system of in our versioning system, right, we are going to need to create a commit, right? So we're going to take all those changes and say, yes, add them to the repository. Those are the changes I want. Everything is fine with them. And so let's describe this point a little bit. We're going to say added index.html, also added images folder with an image of a quokka. There we go. So then we're going to click on commit to main. We are going to commit it to the main branch. Remember, it was a good idea for us to remember what the name of the branch is, and the name of the branch is main. That's the current branch, and we're now going to switch off of this. So we're going to commit to this branch, make another point on it. Okay, so now we have some changes, one commit worth of changes. And if you look at the history, we'll see that there are two commits now. One is the initial commit when we created the README file and the license file. And then the second commit is when we added index.html and also added images folder with an image of a quokka, right? And you can imagine this list of commits in the history growing and growing and growing and growing. And then at some point, you don't even remember what you did at one particular point or another. And this is where these commit messages become very, very helpful, right? It's just kind of like a little description for your future self as to like what you did when you did this particular, when you created this particular commit, right? So it's not a bad idea to keep those commits small and contained. So if you have to undo some changes in those commits, you're not going to lose hours of work. Maybe like you lose 15-20 minutes worth of work, right? Something like that. But right now we have one commit that we can push to the origin remote, right? We have a local commit that is yet to be pushed to GitHub. So let's do that. Push to origin. And remember, that's what we're doing here is we're just taking local changes and we're going through this process of pushing them up onto the cloud, right? So now if I go over to my repository in github.com and I refresh this page, I see the folder images, and inside that I see quokka.webp, and you can view the raw contents of that file, and that's just going to be the webp file, and then I can see my index.html, right? So all of that is great and good, right? So now my web page is online. It's actually on a web URL, but I'm still not seeing it as a web page, right? I want to see it like this. I want to see it as an actual page, not just as a collection of code, which is what GitHub shows me by default, right? So this is where the GitHub Pages service comes handy, right? And this is why we went through this whole process of creating a GitHub account and configuring our repository and downloading the GitHub desktop to be able to move our changes from our local computer to the cloud in order for us to gain access to free publishing system that GitHub has implemented called GitHub Pages, right? So in order to enable this, let's start again from the top view of our repository, right? And so over here you have some parameters for this repository that you can configure. And so we are going to go into the settings. So in the settings, default branch, preview, right? So like you see a whole bunch of various parameters for your repository, and over here, right, there are components to those parameters, what branches you have, what tags you have, and so on and so forth. And down below there is a pages section. So let's go right here. So pages is designed to host your personal, organization, or project pages from a GitHub repository. So if you have a repository that has some HTML documentation, you can host it on GitHub and it's all going to work, right? So we are going to deploy from a branch and classic pages experience, right? So that's what we are going to do. And then right now, GitHub Pages is disabled. You need to select a source. So for example, in our case, it's going to be the main branch because that's the only branch we have. And then are we going to be publishing from the root of the main branch? So the entire repository is going to be published, or you can select to only publish a folder called docs inside your repository, right? So this is helpful, for example, if your code is actually not meant to run on the web, right? If you're creating like a local application, or it's some kind of like a, I don't know, machine learning algorithm, or an exploration of some kind of like a graphic system or whatever it might be, right? But it's not meant to run in the browser, but you still have some kind of documentation that you want to add for people to explain to them how to use it. That's where docs folder is useful. But if your repository is actually meant to run on the web like ours, we can just publish it from root. Perfect. So now we're ready to go. Let's save this. Okay, so it's saved, and now it's gonna start going through these like whole publishing thing. It's gonna take a little bit of time for it to get published, and that's fine, right? Let's give it some time. It will probably come back to it in about 5 minutes. Notice that you can also add a Jekyll theme to your site. Let's not do that. Let's not add Jekyll themes, because Jekyll is a publishing system that GitHub is using, and it's not a bad publishing system, but it adds a level of complexity that we're not really dealing with right now. I'm sure if you're interested in creating a publishing kind of like system out of your repository, you're more than welcome to look up some Jekyll tutorials. And then you can also set up a custom domain, right? So custom domains allow you to serve your site from domains other than connected cat media. So I already have a custom domain connected to my entire GitHub account, right? You most likely won't, but you can also configure custom domains. Like you can purchase a domain, let's say myamazingfirstwebsite.org or whatever, and then you can set up the custom domain for that particular repository. So instead of serving it from github.com/something something, or actually github.io, and we'll look at that in a second, you can serve it from a custom domain, right? Again, learn more about this right here. We're not going to deal with this. It just complicates things. So for now, we're just going to use the default domain that they're going to give us. Okay. All right. Now, let's refresh the page. Hopefully it's already published. Fantastic, it's already published. So your site is live at connectedcatmedia.com/firstwebsite. So I have my GitHub account configured with a custom domain. So I should be able to visit the site from my custom URL. You probably don't. You probably have it something like your username /github.io/repository. But nonetheless, we should be able to visit the website and should be able to see it just like this, right? If you click on this visit the website page. Fantastic, right? So hopefully this worked for everybody, right? And you can compare it to the website that we had on our local system, and they should look exactly the same. The only difference you see that it doesn't actually tell us that it's loading from index.html. If you remember, I mentioned that index.html is a default location and you don't have to specify it. That's how vast majority of web servers are configured. But if I actually type in index.html over here, it will serve it like this, just the same, right? So another thing to remember, another thing to kind of like keep in mind is that idea that your pages are located within folders, right? So for example, we have images folder, right? And inside images folder, we have a kuoka.webp file, right? So here's my file, I clicked on it. So here's the path to it. So it's first website repository / images / kuoka1.webp. So I can copy this path, right? And all I have to do is replace the last component of my path, right? The one that starts with first website with the path that I just copied. So let's just do delete, paste. So, oops, a little too early. Right, so first website and then /, right? So remember, so first website / images / kuoka.webp. So we copy the path. So first website / images / kuoka1.webp, right? So it's the same path. And now if I click, here it is, right? So this is the name of my repository. This is the name of the folder inside the repository. And this is the name of the file inside that folder, right? So that concept that all the files, all the content on the web, it's just files on somebody else's computers, inside folders, inside other folders. And really that's all there is to it. You can see that in action right here, right? So hopefully your page is working. You have published everything correctly. And now we'll be able to start making some changes and modifications to our page. And we should be able to see those changes and modifications taking place right here when we push the files up to the GitHub, right? Again, we're going to be using GitHub Desktop in order to push those changes, right? And you'll be able to always go into settings, pages, and just launch that repository index file right here just by clicking on this visit site button, right? So last thing I wanted to cover today to kind of like round up this workflow is when you close everything and then you go away and then you come back, before you start doing anything else, start getting into a habit of fetching the origin before you do any other work. So fetching the origin will grab all the changes that maybe you made on another computer and then commit it to your repository from another computer, right? Or maybe you're working with a collaborator and that person has made some commits and pushed it up, but you still don't have those locally. So what this fetch origin going to do, it's going to do now this action. It's going to take the remote content and pull it into your clone and update your clone to be up to date with your remote origin, right? So just click this button before you do anything else. And that way your remote and your local copy are going to be synchronized, right? It's going to have exactly the same content. So you're going to be able to start making some changes locally and then commit them and push them up to remote and then keep moving that way. Okay, so but this is really important. And then if for some reason you forget, if for some reason you decide that, well, I don't want to do this or whatever, something happens, right? What might happen is that your remote branch, and I'm going to draw this out actually. So your remote branch might go out of sync with the with your local branch, which it happens, right? So let's see kind of like how we can visualize this. So let's say you have a remote branch, right? And then it's a local clone. So we have commit 1, commit 1. We have commit 2, we have commit 2. We have commit 3, and we have commit 3, right? And then we made some changes, commit 4, right? And those changes, let's say we made them on our desktop computer, right? So commit 4 came from here, right? That's how commit 4 ended up in the origin. And then we forgot to fetch. And then we started building off of commit 3, right? And we just added another commit. Let's call it something else, right? Let's say commit 5. And then when we try to say, hey, I actually want to reconcile them, your remote origin is going to have commit 4 and your local copy is going to have commit 5, right? And you won't be able to resynchronize them. That's a bit of a problem, right? And this is how you typically go about solving this problem, right? So we're going to remember that our repos are cloned, right? That maintain that synchronization ability into specific locations. So if the location changes, that repository is no longer going to maintain its connection to the origin. So let's go into GitHub, and this is my first website. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to delete this first website that I had on the desktop, right? I don't care about it anymore. Now I have it all backed up on GitHub servers, so I can remove this, right? But instead, I'm going to create a new folder called restore/backup, or backup restore, or whatever, however you want to call it, right? So I am going to store the version of my repository that is local right now that I want to use for restoration later, right? So because I have that commit number 5 and I don't want to lose it, presumably I made some changes that I want to save and I want to keep them. And there are absolutely 100%. If you are experienced with Git, you know about stashing and you know about all those strategies on how to deal with it. Otherwise, kudos to you. There are certainly ways that are built into Git that allow you to deal with this easier than this, but I think this is a little bit more straightforward for beginners, right? So what you're going to do, you're going to create a backup and you're just going to move your website repository over there, right? Here it is, moved from GitHub to restore backup. So now if we go to GitHub desktop, it's going to say, oh, I can't find first website. What are we going to do, right? It was last seen at this location. So documents, GitHub, first website, but it's no longer there. What are we going to do? So we are going to clone it again. And this time, what we're going to do, what's going to happen, so we recloned it, right? So what that means is that we separated this branch entirely, right? So this entire, let's make it a different color. So this branch has become completely separate, right? This local one, and we put it in our backup folder. So this has become our backup, and we took this version, the one that has commits 1, 2, 3, 4, and we made a clone out of that. Right, so now this is our local clone on our local machine, and that's fine. But the contents of the first website inside our restore backup have completely lost all of its versioning history because it's no longer a clone. It's completely lost its roots. So it's kind of like all of this stuff that we did here, it's all gone now. So the only thing that's left in that backup version is our last version of the website, which is version number 5, which is fine because what we're going to do, we recloned our repository with the last commit being number 4 into our GitHub folder, right? So here it is. And then we can take the version in the restore backup. Let's say we just added one more image there or something, right? And we can start adding those changes on top of the version 4, right? And when we're done, when we reconciled everything, you're going to have some changes. You're going to commit them. You're going to make that number 5 commit again. And that's fine. Right, actually, let's just illustrate what that looks like. I'm going to add another image of Quokka. Because why not? Where is that? I saw that beautiful sleeping Quokka. But this one's fine. I like it. Ooh, huge. No, something smaller. This is all right. So here's another image of Quokka. It's not the same, is it? No. So I'm gonna open it in a new tab, and I'm gonna save it. And I am going to be saving it to my backup folder, right? So right here in the images. Let's pretend that this is the change that we made, right? So we added a JPEG image of Quokka 2, right? So now we have this change, and what we want to do is we want to add the that image, Quokka2.jpg, to our website repository, now to the clone, right? Not to the backup of whatever divergent version that we've created for restoration, but to the actual clone of the repository that you have locally, right? And you can always double check that simply, like if you kind of lost, or like, oh my God, where am I? What's going on, right? Trace your steps back, go back to your GitHub desktop, right? So here it is. Here's my first repository, right? And you can always, I don't need, I don't need that, right? I can just discard those changes. So you will see something like this, right? And you can always say, oh, show in folder, show in Finder or in Explorer, right? And you'll be able to see that, okay, so documents, GitHub, first website, that's my repository. That's the version that I have locally. And then let's go to my backup. Here it is. And so here I have this new file. Okay, I want to now bring these changes to my repository. So I'm going to take this, drop it inside the images. Okay, and here it is. Now I have this Quokka2.jpg file. And fantastic. So I should be able to edit another image of Quokka. I should be able to now make this commit and should be able to push it to origin. Perfect. Now I can go to my GitHub account and look inside the code of my repository inside the images folder, and I should be able to find this Quokka2.jpg in there. Great. So we'll reconcile this, and I'm going to now just delete this backup to avoid any further confusion. And I'm going to go back to making all the changes to my repository. So I'm going to fetch it again, as I'm supposed to before I do any other changes, and then open in Visual Studio Code, and then add that second image of Quokka, right? So img, remember, source Quokka2, but this time it's going to be .jpg. That's really important. Make sure it's not spelled in all capitals, for example. This will not work. This will not work because the name of the file is exactly .jpg like this. So try to make sure that you type everything correctly, JPG, right? And then I'm going to change the alt to another image of Quokka, save this, right? And you can always look at the local changes, right? All you have to do is you can reveal this in Finder, for example. This is my file in Finder, and I can drop it into my browser. I was going to drop it into my browser, sorry. Drop it into my browser, and here it is. I have two images of Quokka side by side. Perfect. Now I should be able to go back again to GitHub Desktop. Here's my changes to the image. I added this line. That's correct, right? And I can say inserted an image, or another image, right? Another image of a Quokka on a page, or on the page, I guess. And let's commit to main. Commit, push to origin, all done. Perfect. So now it's at origin. I can, again, double check this if I click on index.html here. Here's that second line that I just added. And again, if I go into settings, pages, visit the site. Not updated yet. Let's see. It does take a little bit of time, don't worry. As long as you have those contents in your image, in your file here, right? As long as you can see the changes in the actual contents of the file, don't worry about the page not updating right away. Might take a little bit of time. Come on. I bet if I go to, here's the trick. If you go and open a private window, so it doesn't keep preloading the same content. There we go. In the private window, it doesn't use the cached version. And that means it's pulling all the new information. So now we have the two because it's often very helpful. Another way to check for it, right? It's, see here, it's still not updated. Another way to check for it is to inspect, right? You should be able to find this familiar, by now I hope, the inspector panel. And then if you try to reload it with inspector panel open, even then it doesn't do it. It's because it's a cached version. So sure way is to always just open it in a new incognito window, and it's going to reload it from scratch from the contents. Are you going to work? Nope. Just refusing to work. All right. Well, we already saw it in the private, so we should be good to go. And as long as the contents are here, you're going to be all right. Another way is to open it in a different browser. That's another option of checking to make sure that your changes have actually been published. All right, that's it for now. Next time we are going to talk about CSS and how to now make our pages pretty, or not pretty, or whatever, but make them look the way we want them to look. Style them. All right, cheers guys. See you soon.